The champagne flutes caught the fading September light through floor-to-ceiling windows on the 42nd floor of Sterling Tech Solutions. White roses spilled from silver vases arranged with the kind of precision that spoke of professional event planners rather than personal taste. A three-tiered cake sat untouched on the credenza, its fondant surface reflecting the golden hour glow that bathed downtown Hartford in amber. Declan Hayes stood near the back wall in his catering uniform, black slacks, creased sharp white shirt, tucked military tight, exhausted in the particular way that comes from 12 consecutive hours on your feet, serving people who don't see you. His phone buzzed for the 8th time in 20 minutes. Maeve Hayes, his mother, asking when he'd pick up Isla. The screen glowed with her growing concern, transmitted through increasing punctuation marks. Sweetie's fever is down, but she's asking for you. Then when can you leave, then Declan? He silenced it, without reading the latest message. Another 45 minutes and his shift would end. Another 45 minutes of circulating with trays of Moët and Chandon, among executives who discussed quarterly earnings with the casual enthusiasm most people reserved for sports scores. Across the expansive office space stood Vivian Sterling. 35 today, though the birthday celebration felt more like a corporate branding exercise than an actual party. She wore a charcoal Armani suit that probably cost more than Declan's monthly rent. Her honey blonde hair swept into a low chignon that emphasized the elegant line of her neck. She stood among a cluster of board members nodding at whatever the CFO was saying. Her expression arranged into something that approximated interest but didn't quite reach her eyes. Knox Brennan materialized at Declan's elbow, grinning with the specific mischief of someone about to make a terrible suggestion. 29 and still operating with the worldview of someone who believed life was a series of dares waiting to be accepted. Knox had worked catering at Sterling Tech for 3 years and treated every shift like reconnaissance for a heist movie he'd never actually pull off. Knox nudged Declan's shoulder. See her CEO single-loaded. You should shoot your shot, man. Declan kept his eyes on the tray he was holding, adjusting the remaining flutes into a more balanced arrangement. You're insane. I'm trying to keep this job, not lose it. Come on, what's she gonna do, fire you for saying hello? $20 says you don't have the guts to even ask her the time. I'll take that bet by not taking that bet. Some of us have kids to feed. Knox's grin widened. Exactly my point. Rich wife, no more money problems. Think about it. The exhaustion and stress and sheer accumulated weight of the day converged into a single catastrophic second of poor judgment. Declan lifted his tray in an awkward toast toward where Vivian stood. The gesture half mocking, half resigned, entirely thoughtless. The words came out before his brain could catch up to his mouth, a reflexive deflection of Knox's needling that he meant as nothing more than a throwaway joke to end the conversation. Marry me, then. He'd intended it to sound dismissive, rhetorical, the verbal equivalent of an eye roll. What came out instead landed differently, softer, almost sincere in its delivery despite the absurdity of the context. Vivian Sterling turned. She'd been standing 4 feet behind him, reaching for a champagne flute from the credenza. Their eyes met across a distance that suddenly felt both infinite and non-existent. 200 guests fell into a silence so complete Declan could hear the air conditioning cycling through the overhead vents. The CFO stopped mid-sentence. The board chairman froze with a canapé halfway to his mouth. Somewhere near the windows, someone's phone chimed and went immediately silent, as if even the device understood the gravity of the moment. Vivian's face remained composed, but something flickered in her eyes. Not anger. Declan had braced for fury, for the cold professional wrath of a CEO whose birthday party had been disrupted by the help making inappropriate jokes. What he saw instead looked like pain. Raw and immediate, and quickly shuttered behind a mask of executive neutrality, but there for a split second. Visible. Vulnerable. She held his gaze for 5 seconds that stretched like hours. Her hand trembled slightly as she set down the champagne glass she'd been reaching for, the crystal making the faintest clink against marble. She turned to Sloane Benedict, her executive assistant, a woman in her late 20s with the permanently stressed expression of someone managing 18 simultaneous crises. Vivian said something too quiet for Declan to hear, handed off her untouched champagne, walked toward the elevator with the composed precision of someone who'd learned long ago how to exit gracefully from situations that threatened to crack her careful composure. The party continued after she left, but the energy had fundamentally shifted. Voices dropped to murmurs. People checked their watches with sudden urgency. The cake remained untouched. Within 30 minutes, the celebration had dissolved entirely, guests filtering out with polite excuses about early meetings and long drives home. Declan finished his shift on autopilot, clearing plates and folding napkins, while his mind replayed the moment over and over, each iteration adding new layers of mortification. What had he been thinking? He hadn't been thinking. He'd been tired and stressed and monumentally stupid, and now he'd probably just destroyed his career at a company he desperately needed. Liam Sullivan found him in the service hallway, loading dishes onto a cart, his usually jovial face set in hard lines. The catering manager had worked in hospitality for 25 years and had seen every variety of staff misconduct. But this particular incident seemed to occupy a special category of concern. What the hell was that haze? Declan couldn't meet his eyes. The fluorescent lighting in the service corridor made everything look washed out and institutional. I don't know. A stupid joke. You propositioned the CEO at her own birthday party in front of 200 people. It wasn't a proposition. It was just... Declan stopped because what defense could he possibly offer? It was thoughtless and stupid, and I'm sorry. Liam shook his head slowly, the gesture carrying more disappointment than anger. Go home. We'll talk Monday. Declan drove to his mother's house in a fog of shame, the familiar streets of West Hartford blurring past his windows. The Honda's check engine light had been on for 3 weeks, a problem he couldn't afford to fix until next month's paycheck. He'd worked out a budget that allowed exactly zero margin for error, and losing this job would demolish the careful mathematics that kept him and Isla housed and fed and insured. Maeve Hayes waited at the door of her modest 2-bedroom colonial, the porch light creating a halo effect around her silver hair. She'd taught elementary school for 35 years before retiring and still carried herself with the particular brand of patient authority that came from decades of managing 7-year-olds. Behind her, Isla slept on the living room couch, curled into a tight ball with Mr. Buttons, her stuffed rabbit, tucked under her chin. You're late. Maeve's voice carried gentle reproach rather than criticism. The party ran long. Everything okay? Your daughter's fine. Fever broke an hour ago, but you look like you've seen a ghost. Her eyes searched his face with the X-ray perception of mothers everywhere. Declan forced a smile that felt like it might crack his teeth in half. Just tired. Long night. He carried Isla to the car, buckling her into the booster seat with practiced efficiency born of 3 years as a single father. She stirred slightly, mumbling something about unicorns and her upcoming school project, then settled back into sleep. The drive to their apartment took 15 minutes. 15 minutes Declan used to catastrophize his immediate future. He imagined walking into work Monday to find his badge deactivated security waiting to escort him out. He imagined the HR meeting, the termination letter, the humiliating explanation to Isla about why Daddy had to find a new job, why things might be tight for a while, why they might have to move in with Grandma Maeve. By the time he carried his daughter up 2 flights of stairs to their apartment in Parkville, he'd convinced himself his professional life was effectively over. The apartment felt smaller each time he came home, though the dimensions hadn't changed. 2 bedrooms, 850 square feet, 2nd floor of a brick building constructed in the 1960s when Hartford's manufacturing sector still employed half the city. The living room held an IKEA sofa. He'd assembled himself a 32-inch television from 2015 and approximately 3,000 of Isla's possessions scattered across every horizontal surface. The kitchen featured a refrigerator that was 70% empty except for the essentials: milk, eggs, string cheese for Isla's lunches, and a slowly aging container of leftover spaghetti. The walls held a curated history of their small family. Isla at the hospital, minutes old and screaming. Isla's first day of kindergarten, gap-toothed and glowing. Isla at the beach last summer, the one vacation they'd managed in 3 years. One frame sat face down on the bookshelf, his wedding photo with Corinne, a relic he couldn't quite bring himself to throw away or display. Declan tucked Isla into her bed, smoothing dark hair away from her forehead. Her room was the only space in the apartment that felt abundant, shelves packed with books, walls covered in unicorn stickers. A galaxy projector she'd gotten for Christmas casting constellations across the ceiling. She stirred as he pulled the blanket up to her chin. "Daddy, why do you look sad?" The question hit him like a fist to the sternum. "I'm not sad, sweetheart, just tired." "You look sad. Your eyes get wrinkly when you're sad." "I'm fine, I promise. I love you more than anything in the world." "Love you too, Daddy. You're the best daddy ever." He sat with her until her breathing evened out into sleep, then retreated to the kitchen table with his decade-old Dell laptop. The refrigerator hummed its familiar off-key rhythm. Somewhere in the building, someone was watching television too loud. Declan opened a job search site and stared at the blinking cursor in the search bar. His employment history read like a study in lateral moves and marginal gains. Warehouse worker at Amazon's Hartford facility from 20 to 2019, $16 an hour with no benefits. Delivery driver for FedEx from 20 to 2021, $18 an hour with minimal health coverage. Then Sterling Tech in 2021, $22 an hour with the best benefits package he'd ever seen. Health insurance that covered Isla's asthma medication, dependent care assistance, that subsidized after-school programs, a 401k, with company matching, that represented the first retirement savings he'd ever accumulated. Isla's asthma was mild, but required consistent medication. Albuterol inhalers, a daily controller when her symptoms flared during allergy season. $400 a month without insurance, $40 with Sterling Tech's coverage. The dependent care benefit provided $200 monthly, exactly enough to cover the gap between what after-school programs cost and what he could afford. The schedule at Sterling Tech was predictable enough that he could pick Isla up on time 4 days a week. Maintain some semblance of routine in a life that had felt dangerously unstable since the divorce. The divorce. Declan closed the laptop and let his head drop into his hands. March 2021. Isla, 4 years old, their marriage ending not with explosions but with the quiet acknowledgement that they wanted fundamentally different things. Corinne had dreams of becoming a registered nurse, ambitions she'd set aside when Isla was born and money got tight. She'd wanted to go back to school, wanted the chance to build a career that meant something beyond paycheck-to-paycheck survival. They'd done the math together, sitting at this same kitchen table, and realized they couldn't afford her education and their current life simultaneously. The conversation played in his memory with perfect clarity, Corinne's voice steady despite the tears tracking down her face. "I don't want to resent you. I don't want to wake up in 5 years hating both of us for the choices we didn't make. You could never be a burden. Not to me, not to Isla. But I feel like one. And that's not your fault, it's just we got married too young. Had Isla before we were ready, and now we're stuck in this cycle where neither of us gets to want anything beyond survival. What if we figured out a way, cut expenses somewhere, I could pick up extra shifts? For how long? 5 years of nursing school, and then what? I resent you for sacrificing everything while you resent me for asking you to. That's not a marriage, Deck. That's just two people making each other miserable slowly." They'd filed for divorce that spring. Corinne moved to Boston, enrolled at Northeastern University, worked nights as a medical assistant while completing her nursing degree. She'd graduated last year, landed a position as an RN at Massachusetts General Hospital, now earned $75,000 a year, and sent child support checks that technically weren't required under their agreement. She visited Isla once a month, called every Sunday. Maintained the relationship with their daughter, even if the one with Declan had dissolved into cordial distance. Declan didn't regret the divorce. They'd both been honest about what they needed, mature enough to recognize when continuation meant destruction. But he regretted the circumstances that had made it necessary. Regretted that loving someone hadn't been enough to overcome the practical mathematics of survival. Regretted that Isla would grow up shuttling between two parents instead of in a home with both. At 1:30 in the morning, Declan finally opened his resume document and updated the dates just in case. His cursor hovered over the job search button, but he couldn't bring himself to click. Not yet. Maybe Liam would give him another chance. Maybe Vivian Sterling wouldn't care enough about a catering worker's stupid joke to push for termination. Maybe the whole thing would blow over and become an embarrassing story he'd cringe about for the rest of his life, but wouldn't cost him his livelihood. Maybe. He thought about Vivian's face in that moment, the pain in her eyes before she'd locked it away behind executive composure. He'd been so focused on his own mortification that he hadn't properly considered what his thoughtless joke might have meant to her. Why would "marry me" hurt instead of anger her? What wound had he accidentally pressed against Declan Googled her name? Forbes profile, Wikipedia entry, dozens of articles about the youngest female CEO in Connecticut's tech industry. Vivian Sterling, 35, MBA from Wharton, Bachelor's in Computer Science from MIT. Net worth estimated at $47 million, most of it tied up in Sterling tech stock. Photos of her at charity galas, industry conferences, ribbon-cutting ceremonies. In every image, she stood alone. No partner, no +1, no ring on her left hand. The articles painted her as brilliant and driven and slightly mysterious. They mentioned her father, Reginald Sterling, the company founder who'd stepped back from day-to-day operations, but maintained a board seat and considerable influence. They discussed her strategic vision, her talent for identifying emerging markets, her ability to turn around struggling divisions. None of them mentioned friends. None of them captured anything that felt personal or real beyond the professional accomplishments. Declan stared at a photo from some gala event, Vivian in a silver gown that probably cost more than his car, smiling at the camera with an expression that looked practiced rather than genuine. He wondered what it would be like to have $47 million and still look that lonely. At 2 in the morning, he finally crawled into bed, exhausted but unable to quiet his racing thoughts. His last conscious reflection before sleep took him was a strange one. Not fear of losing his job, though that terror remained, but curiosity about the woman whose birthday party he'd accidentally ruined. The woman who'd looked at him with pain instead of anger. The woman who'd left her own celebration because a stranger's joke had cut too close to something raw. Vivian Sterling sat alone in her office as the city lights of Hartford glittered 42 floors below. She'd dismissed Sloan an hour ago, sent everyone home, claimed she needed to catch up on quarterly reports. The birthday cake sat on the credenza, slightly wilted now, untouched except by the passage of time. She'd taken off her heels, let down her hair, traded the armor of professional competence for the vulnerability of solitude. The champagne she poured into a paper cup she'd thrown away, the crystal flutes unable to stomach their association with the party, tasted expensive and empty. Vivian had learned to distinguish between expensive and valuable years ago, usually when it was too late to matter. The champagne was expensive. The silence was valuable. 2 words kept circling through her mind, a loop she couldn't break. "Marry me," said by a stranger who didn't know her name, didn't know her net worth, didn't know anything about her except that she was a woman at a party. He'd meant it as a joke. She knew he'd meant it as a joke. But something about the casual way he'd said it, the thoughtless sincerity in his delivery, had cracked open a door in her chest she'd welded shut 7 years ago. Vivian stood and walked to the windows, pressing her palm against glass still warm from the day's heat. 7 years since Thaddeus Ashford had proven that everyone had a price, and hers was apparently a strategic partnership with an expiration date built into the prenuptial agreement. 7 years since she'd heard her father say that love was a luxury people in their position couldn't afford, that she should be grateful the arrangement had fallen apart before it became legally complicated. 7 years of being absolutely certain that no one would ever want to marry her for reasons that didn't involve lawyers and exit strategies and careful calculations about asset allocation. The memory of that overheard phone call remained vivid despite the years. She'd come home early from yoga, headache blooming behind her eyes, planning to take a bath and sleep until the wedding stress subsided. Thaddeus had been in his home office at the penthouse, door ajar, voice carrying clearly into the hallway where Vivian stood frozen. "Yeah, the prenup is airtight. She keeps her Sterling Tech shares, I keep my Vertex Capital equity. Clean separation of assets. You're already planning the divorce." The lawyer's voice had sounded amused rather than concerned. "It's a strategic partnership, Tom. 5 years minimum, then we revisit terms. She gets legitimacy in circles that don't take 35-year-old female CEOs seriously. I get direct access to Sterling Tech's client base and board connections. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement." Does she know it's an arrangement? Vivian's smart. She knows how these things work at our level. Except Vivian hadn't known. Or she'd known intellectually but believed foolishly that their relationship might be the exception. That Thaddeus actually loved her rather than the opportunities she represented. That the engagement ring he'd presented at a dinner with both their families, Tiffany's 5.2 carats cost. He'd mentioned 3 times meant something beyond its status as a down payment on future business advantages. She'd walked into his office and ended the engagement that night. Thaddeus hadn't fought her on it, hadn't even seemed particularly surprised. He'd asked if she was sure, pointed out that they made sense together professionally. Suggested they could always renegotiate the terms if she had concerns about specific clauses. When she'd said no, final done, he'd shrugged and asked if she wanted the ring back for sentimental reasons. Reginald Sterling's response had been worse than Thaddeus's indifference. Her father had called her naive, impractical, too emotional for leadership if she couldn't separate business from personal feelings. He'd pointed out that marriages in their social stratum were always strategic to some degree, that she was privileged to have had the choice at all, that she'd thrown away a perfectly good alliance because of some romantic notion about love that had no place in the lives of people with their level of responsibility and wealth. Vivian had stopped trying to make him understand that she didn't want a perfectly good alliance. She wanted someone to choose her. Not her money, not her connections, not her last name. Just her. The woman who stress-baked terrible cookies at midnight, who talked to her cat like he was a therapist, who sometimes drove to the beach at sunrise just to remember what the world looked like when it wasn't filtered through quarterly earnings reports. In the 7 years since she'd dated 4 men, each relationship had followed the same trajectory: initial connection, growing attraction, the eventual revelation that they wanted something from her that had nothing to do with who she actually was. The startup CEO who'd casually mentioned that Sterling Tech's investment arm might be interested in his company. The Yale professor who'd wondered if she'd consider endowing a chair in his department. The corporate lawyer who'd suggested they could become a power couple, explicitly using those words like they were an aspiration rather than a red flag. The banker who'd been at least honest enough to say outright that marrying her would be excellent for both their careers. She'd ended each relationship quickly, cleanly, without drama or explanation beyond the simple truth that they weren't compatible. None of them had fought for her. None of them had seemed particularly disappointed. They'd all moved on to other prospects with the ease of people shopping for the right investment opportunity rather than mourning lost love. Vivian returned to her desk and pulled out the bottom drawer, extracting a worn paperback she kept hidden there. Pride and Prejudice, her grandmother's copy margins filled with notes in fading blue ink. Eleanor Sterling had given it to her when Vivian was 15, right after her mother had died, right before her father had started grooming her to take over the company. Her grandmother had written on the inside cover, "Don't let them make you practical, darling. Stay foolish enough to believe in love." She'd tried. For longer than was probably wise, she'd tried to believe that someone would eventually see past the balance sheet to the person underneath. But at 35, with $47 million in a corner office, and a reputation for brilliance that meant nothing when she came home to an empty house. Vivian had accepted that her grandmother's advice belonged to a different world, one where women who looked like her, who had what she had, got to be loved for themselves. The catering worker, she didn't even know his name, had said "marry me" like it was the punchline to a joke only he understood. No calculation behind it, no agenda, just thoughtless words that had landed like a grenade in the carefully constructed defenses she'd built against wanting things she couldn't have. Because for one split second, hearing those words delivered with such casual sincerity, she'd felt what it might be like to be on the receiving end of a proposal that wasn't a business transaction. Vivian finished the champagne and stood smoothing her suit even though no one was there to see her. Fitzgerald, her 4-year-old tabby cat, emerged from beneath the desk where he'd been sleeping and wound between her ankles with the demanding affection cats reserved for the humans they'd decided to tolerate. She picked him up, buried her face in his fur, let herself have 30 seconds of the vulnerability she couldn't afford anywhere else. Then she set him down, gathered her things, locked her office, and drove to the only place in Hartford that felt like home. Not her penthouse apartment downtown, all glass and chrome and spectacular views that meant nothing when you had no one to share them with. Her grandmother's house in West End, a modest 3-bedroom colonial that Reginald had insisted she sell after Eleanor died. Too small, he'd said. Wrong neighborhood for someone of her position. Bad optics. Vivian had kept it anyway. Kept the worn furniture and the overgrown garden and the kitchen where her grandmother had taught her to bake bread on Sunday mornings. Kept the bedroom that still smelled faintly of lavender and old books. Kept the living room where Eleanor had died peacefully in her sleep at 87, having lived exactly the kind of life Vivian wanted and would probably never have, full of love and mess and ordinary magic that couldn't be quantified on a spreadsheet. She let herself in just after midnight, Fitzgerald trotting ahead to claim his favorite spot on the back of the sofa. The house wrapped around her like a blanket, familiar and safe and mercifully free of expectations. Vivian made tea she didn't drink, sat in her grandmother's chair, and let herself cry for the first time in months. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet tears that acknowledged the loneliness she spent so much energy pretending didn't exist. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sloan. Board meeting Monday 9 a.m. Your father called. Wants to discuss the party incident. You okay? Vivian typed back a lie. Fine. See you Monday. She wasn't fine. She was 35 and successful and wealthy, and so profoundly isolated that a stranger's accidental joke had broken something loose inside her. But fine was the only acceptable answer, so fine was what she'd be when Monday came and she had to face whatever consequences came from leaving her own birthday party early. For tonight, alone in her grandmother's house with a cat who tolerated her and the ghost of a woman who'd believed love mattered more than practical arrangements, Vivian let herself want things she couldn't have. Let herself imagine what it would feel like to hear someone say "marry me" and mean it. Not as a business proposition or a strategic alliance or a carefully negotiated contract. Just as a choice. A simple, foolish, beautiful choice to love someone who had nothing to offer but themselves. She fell asleep in the chair, Fitzgerald purring on her lap, and dreamed of a different life than the one she'd built. When she woke at dawn, she made herself a promise. Monday, she'd call the catering worker up to her office. Not to fire him, the thought hadn't even occurred to her, but to understand. To ask him if he knew what those words meant to someone who'd never heard them without fine print attached. To maybe possibly foolishly see if the pain she'd seen in his eyes when their gazes met meant he understood loneliness too. It was a terrible idea, impractical and inappropriate, and exactly the kind of emotional decision her father would cite as evidence that women were too unstable for leadership positions. Vivian was going to do it anyway, because at 35, with everything she was supposed to want and nothing that actually mattered, she was tired of being practical. She was ready to be foolish instead. Monday morning arrived with the particular dread of someone walking toward their own execution. Declan reached Sterling Tech 30 minutes early, wearing his cleanest white shirt and the only pair of dress pants that didn't have a permanent crease from being folded in the same spot for 3 years. He'd written 3 versions of an apology letter by hand, each one landing somewhere between groveling and defensive, finally settling on one that simply acknowledged his lapse in judgment and requested the opportunity to continue his employment. The letter sat folded in his pocket, edges already softening from nervous handling. His security badge still worked. The small beep of approval when he scanned through the lobby doors felt like a stay of execution, temporary but real. Declan changed into his uniform in the staff locker room, Knox already there suiting up for the breakfast service shift. Knox looked up, eyebrows raised in theatrical surprise. "Didn't think I'd see you back. Thought for sure you'd be toast after Friday." "Yeah, well, still employed until someone tells me otherwise." "That took balls though, man. Stupid balls, but balls. CEO looked like you'd slapped her." Declan's jaw tightened. The memory of Vivian's face, that flash of pain before she'd shuddered it away, had kept him awake most of the weekend. "Can we not talk about it?" Sure, but hey, if you do get fired, at least you'll have the best termination story ever." Liam Sullivan appeared in the doorway before Declan could respond, his expression unreadable. "Hayes, Ms. Sterling wants to see you. Her office now." Every muscle in Declan's body locked. This was it. The termination meeting, probably with HR present, definitely with security ready to escort him out if he made a scene. He nodded, unable to trust his voice, and followed Liam out of the locker room. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like ascending to a gallows, each floor number illuminating with the finality of Countdown. Sloane Benedict met him outside Vivian's office, her professional smile doing nothing to mask the curiosity in her eyes. She wore a navy suit that looked expensive in the effortless way truly expensive things did. Her dark hair pulled back in a style that probably had a specific name Declan didn't know. "Mr. Hayes, Ms. Sterling is expecting you." She knocked once, opened the door, gestured him inside with the practiced efficiency of someone who managed impossible schedules and even more impossible personalities. Declan stepped into an office that could have fit his entire apartment 3 times over. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Hartford's modest skyline, morning light turning the Connecticut River to molten gold. The furniture was minimalist and clearly designer, all clean lines and expensive materials. But what struck him most was how impersonal it felt. No photos, no personal items beyond a ceramic bowl filled with mints and what looked like a well-worn paperback tucked between financial reports on the bookshelf. Vivian stood behind her desk wearing a charcoal suit that made her look simultaneously powerful and untouchable. Her hair was pulled into the same severe chignon from Friday makeup, flawless every inch, the CEO whose net worth was calculated in millions. But when she looked at him, Declan saw the same exhaustion he'd seen in his own mirror that morning. "Mr. Hayes, please sit." He sat in one of the leather chairs facing her desk, acutely aware of how much this furniture probably cost compared to his hourly wage. His hands found the armrests gripping hard enough that his knuckles went white. Vivian didn't sit. Instead, she moved to the windows, putting distance between them, her back to him as she looked out over the city. The silence stretched long enough that Declan's nerves started converting to confusion. If this was a termination meeting, it was the strangest one he'd ever heard of. Finally, Vivian turned back to face him, arms crossed, expression carefully neutral. "I have a question, Mr. Hayes, and I need you to answer honestly." "Of course. Friday night when you said what you said, was it funny to you because it was absurd or because you think I'm the kind of woman no one would actually want to marry?" The question landed like a punch Declan hadn't seen coming. Of all the ways he'd imagined this conversation going, this wasn't among them. "I neither. I wasn't trying to insult anyone." "Then why is it obvious it was a joke? What made it so clearly ridiculous that you'd propose to me?" Declan struggled to find words that wouldn't make things worse. "Because you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and I serve champagne at corporate events. Because you probably make in a week what I make in a year. Because we exist in completely different worlds. So it's about money. It's about reality. People like you don't—" He stopped, recognizing the trap. "I'm sorry, I can't seem to say anything that doesn't sound worse." Vivian moved back to her desk but didn't sit, instead leaning against it with her arms still crossed. The posture made her look smaller somehow, less like a CEO and more like a person trying to hold herself together. I was engaged once, 7 years ago. His name was Thaddeus Ashford, CFO of a venture capital firm. We dated for 18 months. He proposed at dinner with both our families present. The ring cost more than most people's cars. Declan said nothing, sensing she needed to tell this story without interruption. 2 weeks before the wedding, I came home early from yoga. He was on the phone with his lawyer discussing the prenuptial agreement. I heard him describe our marriage as a strategic partnership with a 5-year minimum term before we'd revisit the arrangement. He was planning our divorce before we'd even married, called it mutually beneficial. Said I got legitimacy in business circles that didn't take women seriously. He got access to Sterling Tech's network and client base. Her voice stayed steady, clinical, like she was recounting someone else's story. But Declan saw her hands grip the edge of the desk, knuckles white against dark wood. I ended it that night. My father said I was foolish and naive, that marriages at our level are always strategic to some degree, that I should have been grateful Thaddeus was at least honest about the terms. She met Declan's eyes directly, and he saw something raw there beneath the professional composure. Since then, I've been proposed to twice more, both times with lawyers present, both times with contracts specifying asset division and exit clauses, both times by men who saw me as an opportunity rather than a person. Declan's throat felt tight. I didn't know. I'm sorry. I don't need you to be sorry for not knowing my history. I need you to understand why your joke hurt. She finally sat down, the movement somehow making her look more vulnerable than powerful. When you said those words, like it was the most natural thing in the world, like I was just a woman at a party instead of a balance sheet in heels, it reminded me of something I'd forgotten. That proposal is supposed to be about choice, about someone wanting you, not what you represent. It was just a stupid deflection. My coworker was giving me grief, and I said the first thing that came to mind. I swear I wasn't trying to hurt you. Vivian studied him for a long moment. Tell me about yourself, Mr. Hayes. Why do you work here? The shift in topic threw him. The insurance. My daughter has asthma. Sterling Tech has the best coverage I've ever had. You have a daughter. How old? 7. Isla. She'll be 8 in February. And you're raising her alone. Mostly. Her mother lives in Boston, visits once a month. We divorced 3 years ago. Declan wasn't sure why he was sharing this, why this conversation felt less like a termination meeting and more like something he didn't have words for. Why did you divorce? She wanted to go back to school, become a nurse. We couldn't afford it in our life at the same time. So we chose for both of us to have a chance at what we wanted instead of both of us resenting each other for what we gave up. Vivian's expression softened almost imperceptibly. That's remarkably mature. It's just honest. Love isn't always enough when the math doesn't work. He paused, then added quietly, but I promised myself after that I'd never joke about marriage. It's not something I take lightly. So when I said what I said Friday, I violated my own rule, and I'm genuinely sorry for that. You apologized, but you still haven't said what you're sorry for. Declan considered this. I'm sorry that my thoughtlessness reminded you that you're lonely. I'm sorry that I accidentally touched something painful. I'm sorry that in trying to deflect my coworker's stupid suggestion, I made you feel like the punchline. Something in Vivian's face cracked open. Not dramatically, just a slight relaxation around her eyes, a breath she'd been holding finally released. No one's ever apologized for making me feel lonely before. Then you've been spending time with the wrong people. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Apparently so. She stood smoothing her suit jacket with precise movements. You're not fired, Mr. Hayes. In fact, I'm not sure why you thought you would be. I propositioned my boss at her birthday party in front of 200 people. You made a joke in poor taste. Hardly a firing offense. Though I'd appreciate if you kept such humor to yourself in the future. Declan stood as well, relief flooding through him so intensely his legs felt unsteady. "Thank you. I will. I promise." He turned to leave, made it halfway to the door before Vivian spoke again. "Mr. Hayes, the other day when you listened to me, when you didn't laugh or make excuses or try to minimize what I was telling you, that meant more than you realize." Declan looked back at her, this woman who had everything except the one thing she actually wanted, standing alone in an office the size of a small house. "You're welcome, Ms. Sterling. Vivian, at least when we're not in public." The words hung between them, an invitation or a boundary shift or something Declan didn't quite know how to interpret. He nodded once and left, pulling the door closed behind him. 3 weeks passed in a strange, suspended state, where Declan couldn't quite tell if something was happening or if he was imagining patterns that didn't exist. Vivian had initiated what she called Leadership Visibility, a 6-month program where executives spent time on every floor understanding operations from ground level. The board had mandated it after employee satisfaction surveys dropped to 62%, lowest in 5 years. So the CEO appeared in places she'd never frequented before. The 3rd-floor break room where Declan sometimes ate lunch, the loading dock where deliveries arrived each morning, the hallway outside the childcare center where employees occasionally brought their children. Each time she was ostensibly there for legitimate reasons, reviewing operations, speaking with department heads, conducting the mandated visibility program. But Declan noticed how her gaze would find him in a crowd, hold for a moment, then move on as if it had never landed there at all. On a Wednesday in early October, he was eating lunch in the 3rd-floor lounge, leftover spaghetti in a Tupperware container, the same meal he'd packed 3 days running because buying groceries more frequently wasn't in the budget when Vivian walked in. She wore navy today, her hair still in that severe chignon, but something about her posture seemed less armored than usual. She got coffee from the machine that produced something only technically classifiable as coffee, then turned and saw him. Their eyes met. She nodded. He nodded back. Neither spoke, but the acknowledgement carried weight neither of them could quite name. Knox, sitting 2 tables away, noticed. Of course he noticed. Knox noticed everything. "Why's the CEO suddenly everywhere you are? Leadership Visibility Program, she's doing rounds." "Uh-huh. And she just happens to be visible wherever you're working." Declan ignored him, but the observation lodged in his mind like a splinter. Was Vivian seeking him out, or was he reading patterns into coincidence because some part of him wanted them to be there? The question answered itself on a Friday afternoon in mid-October when Declan's phone rang during his break. Hartford Elementary School Nurse Patterson's number. "Mr. Hayes, Isla had a fall on the playground. Nothing serious, just scraped knees, but she's asking for you and getting quite upset. I'll be there in 12 minutes. Liam granted permission with visible reluctance. They were short-staffed catering events scheduled that afternoon, but even Liam wouldn't deny a parent rushing to an injured child. Declan made it to the school in 11 minutes, found Isla in the nurse's office with bandaged knees and tear-stained cheeks, clutching Mr. Buttons like the stuffed rabbit held magical healing properties. She launched herself at him the moment he appeared in the doorway. "Daddy. Hey, baby, you okay? Let me see." The scrapes were superficial, nothing that wouldn't heal in a few days, but Isla's distress seemed disproportionate to the injury. Nurse Patterson gave him a knowing look. "She's been asking for you for 20 minutes straight. I think she just needs her dad." Declan signed her out, carried her to the car, buckled her into the booster seat with gentle hands. "Does it hurt bad?" "A little, but I wanted you. I'm here now. I'm going to take you back to work with me. Okay? You can sit in the employee lounge, watch your shows on the iPad. I'll check on you every few minutes. Promise? Promise?" The 3rd-floor lounge had seen better decades. Worn furniture that predated the building's renovation, a coffee maker that produced something vaguely resembling coffee if you were generous, and a vending machine that ate quarters more often than it dispensed snacks. Declan set Isla up on the couch with her iPad, a juice box, and strict instructions to come find him if she needed anything. He'd been gone maybe 10 minutes checking with Liam about the afternoon's catering setup when he returned to find his daughter deep in conversation with Vivian Sterling. The CEO of a multi-million-dollar company sat on the ratty couch next to a 7-year-old, her designer suit somehow not looking ridiculous against the backdrop of peeling linoleum and fluorescent lighting. Isla was showing her the frozen Band-Aids on her knees with the pride of someone displaying battle scars. Vivian listened with what appeared to be genuine interest, her posture relaxed in a way Declan had never seen it. "Daddy," Isla waved enthusiastically. "This is Vivian. She thinks my Band-Aids are cool." Vivian looked up and Declan caught something in her expression. Surprise mixed with something softer, more vulnerable. "Mr. Hayes, I was just admiring Isla's collection." "I'm sorry, I didn't know she'd—" Declan stopped himself before he could apologize for his daughter's existence. "Isla, this is Ms. Sterling. She's my boss. She told me to call her Vivian." Isla's confidence in social situations never failed to amaze him. "Are you sad today too, Vivian? You have the same eyes as my daddy when he's sad." The observation hit the room like a depth charge. Vivian's carefully maintained composure flickered just for a second before she recovered. "What makes you think I'm sad?" "Your eyes, and you're sitting by yourself in here. My daddy says sometimes people need to be alone when they're sad, but sometimes they need a friend. Do you need a friend?" Declan started to intervene. His 7-year-old had just psychoanalyzed his boss, but Vivian spoke first, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "I think maybe I do need a friend. Thank you for noticing." Isla beamed. "I'm good at noticing. Daddy says I notice things other people miss, like how Mr. Buttons is sad when his ear is bent wrong, so I have to fix it." She demonstrated adjusting the rabbit's ear with solemn care. "That's very thoughtful of you." Vivian glanced at Declan, something passing between them that he couldn't quite name. "Your daughter is remarkable. She's my whole world." The words came out more raw than he'd intended, carrying weight beyond their simple meaning. Vivian's eyes held his for a beat longer than professional courtesy required, and Declan felt something shift in the air between them. Not attraction exactly, though that was part of it. More like recognition. Two lonely people acknowledging each other's loneliness without saying it aloud. Isla, oblivious to the adult undercurrents, launched into a detailed explanation of the playground politics that had led to her fall. Vivian listened with apparent fascination, asking follow-up questions, treating a 7-year-old's social drama with the same seriousness she probably brought to board meetings. When she eventually stood to leave, she paused at the door. "Mr. Hayes, thank you for the other day, for listening. You already thanked me for that. I know, but I wanted to say it again." She looked at Isla. "And thank you, Isla, for reminding me that it's okay to need friends." After she left, Isla turned to Declan with wide eyes. "Daddy, she's really pretty and nice. Is she your friend?" "I don't know. Maybe. You should be friends. She needs one." Out of the mouths of children, Declan thought, came observations that adults spent years learning to ignore. The quiet courtship, if it could even be called that, began with text messages about nothing. 2 days after Isla met Vivian, Declan's phone buzzed during dinner with an unknown number. "Mr. Hayes, this is Vivian Sterling. Isla left a drawing in the employee lounge. I wanted to make sure she got it back." He stared at the message, processing that the CEO had his number. From HR records, probably. "Thank you. What's the drawing of you, apparently, as a princess, with what I believe is supposed to be my cat labeled Fitzgerald. That's her current artistic phase. Everything involves princesses." "It's lovely." She wrote Princess Vivian at the top. "No one's called me a princess since I was about 10. She has that effect on people. Makes you remember things you've forgotten." "Like what?" "Like being seen as a person instead of a position." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "Yes, exactly like that." The conversations continued from their evening exchanges that never quite crossed into personal territory but danced around its edges. Declan learned that Vivian stress-baked terrible cookies at midnight. Vivian learned that Declan had never been west of Pennsylvania. Neither acknowledged that these conversations were becoming the highlight of their respective weeks. Then coffee in the third-floor lounge became a routine. Twice weekly, Vivian would appear with some excuse about operational oversight, staying just long enough to share the table where Declan ate his packed lunch. They talked about Hartford's weather, about the Patriots' losing streak, about nothing important and everything that mattered. Late October brought the first real shift. Declan was leaving Friday evening, exhausted from a double shift covering for a sick colleague, when he found Vivian in the parking garage staring at her Mercedes with visible frustration. The engine clicked uselessly when she turned the key, battery completely dead. "I have jumper cables." She, startled at his voice, turned to find him standing a respectful distance away. "You carry jumper cables? Single dad habit. Never know when you'll need them." He pulled his Honda check engine light, glowing like an accusation alignment, questionable registration 3 weeks from expiring, next to her Mercedes. The visual contrast would have been comical if it weren't so stark. He connected the cables with practiced efficiency, and they stood in the concrete and fluorescent atmosphere of the parking garage, making small talk while the battery charged. 15 minutes of nothing conversations about her afternoon meeting that had run long and his need to pick up Isla from his mother's house. Nothing profound, nothing that would seem significant to anyone observing, but something in the quality of the silence between words felt different, comfortable. Easy in a way that shouldn't have been possible between a CEO and the man who served champagne at her meetings. When her engine finally turned over, Vivian offered to buy him dinner as thanks. "I have to get Isla." Disappointment flickered across her face before she could hide it. "Of course. Another time. Unless," Declan surprised himself, "unless you want to come. It's just McDonald's and a 7-year-old who talks non-stop about unicorns, but I'd love that." They caravanned to West Hartford in their mismatched vehicles, Vivian's Mercedes worth more than Declan earned in 3 years following his Honda with its persistent problems and questionable future. Maeve's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline when Declan appeared with his boss in tow, but she was gracious enough not to comment beyond a meaningful look that promised future interrogation. Isla was thrilled beyond measure, chattering about Princess Vivian all the way to the McDonald's on Farmington Avenue. Watching Vivian Sterling sit in a plastic booth eating a Happy Meal with his daughter was surreal in ways Declan couldn't articulate. She looked simultaneously out of place and completely natural, asking Isla about her toy, a My Little Pony that Isla treated like treasure with genuine interest rather than adult condescension. "I used to collect these when I was your age." Isla's eyes went wide with delight. "Really? Do you still have them?" "No. My father said they were childish. I gave them away when I was 10. The sadness in her voice was barely perceptible, but Declan caught it. Caught, too, the implication that at 10 years old, Vivian had already learned to sacrifice the things she loved for someone else's approval. Before he could think of something comforting to say, Isla responded with the brutal honesty of childhood. "That's sad. I'm never giving mine away, even when I'm old like Daddy." "Hey, 37 isn't old." Vivian laughed, actually laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it surprised Declan. And the transformation was remarkable. Her face went from beautiful to radiant years, seeming to fall away, and Declan felt something in his chest constrict and expand simultaneously. A sensation he hadn't experienced since the early days with Corinne, before the realities of life had worn down the edges of what they'd built together. This was dangerous territory. This was his boss. This was a woman whose net worth could buy his entire neighborhood twice over. This was impossible by every measure that mattered. And yet, in the parking lot after dinner, Isla asleep in her car seat, they stood between their vehicles in the orange glow of streetlights. November air carried the first real bite of approaching winter, and Declan could see Vivian's breath misting in the cold. "Thank you for tonight. I haven't had this much fun in," she paused, calculating, "years, probably. Happy meals and plastic toys, authenticity, people who don't want anything from me except my company." We do want something. She tensed, and Declan realized how that had sounded. We want you to be happy. Isla asked me earlier why you seemed sad. I didn't have a good answer for her. Vivian's eyes glistened in the streetlight tears. She blinked back before they could fall. That's the kindest thing anyone said to me in longer than I can remember. He reached out without thinking, squeezed her hand. Once let go before the gesture could mean more than comfort, but they both felt it, that electric charge of connection possibilities neither was ready to name but couldn't quite deny either. After that night, the boundaries dissolved incrementally like ice melting so slowly you didn't notice until suddenly there was water where solid ground had been. Sunday afternoon, Vivian texted about a leaky faucet at her grandmother's house. Did he happen to know anything about plumbing? Declan showed up with his toolbox and Isla, who immediately made friends with Fitzgerald despite the cat's general misanthropy. While Declan fixed the faucet, Vivian sat on the bathroom floor and talked. About her grandmother Eleanor, who'd left her this house and a legacy of believing love mattered more than status. About her father Reginald, who'd built Sterling Tech from nothing and expected his daughter to be its foundation rather than its architect. About the life that looked perfect from outside but felt hollow from within. I could hire someone to fix this, you know. But then I wouldn't get to see you. The words hung in the small bathroom, honest and dangerous. Vivian met his eyes in the mirror above the sink, and neither of them looked away. And Declan, I know this is complicated and probably stupid and definitely inappropriate. But I like talking to you. I like that Isla makes you laugh. I like that you're real with me in a way I suspect you can't be with most people. Real is a luxury I can't usually afford. Maybe you're spending time with people who charge too much for it. She smiled at that, sad and genuine and beautiful. Maybe I am. They didn't kiss that day, didn't acknowledge what was building between them beyond those moments of dangerous honesty. But when Declan left, Vivian walked them to the car, and her hand lingered on his arm just long enough to mean something neither of them was ready to define. The whispers started small, as such things always do. A comment in the break room about how Vivian seemed to eat lunch on the third floor more often lately. A knowing glance when someone spotted them talking in the parking garage. Knox kept his mouth shut, loyal in his own way, but others noticed. Others talked. By late October, the rumors had metastasized into something uglier. Declan overheard 2 employees in the cafeteria speculating about whether he was sleeping his way to a promotion. Another claimed he was using Isla to manipulate the CEO's maternal instincts for professional advancement. Stripped of context, it sounded plausible if you assumed the worst about people. If you couldn't imagine that a friendship might exist across the chasm of their different circumstances. The anonymous note appeared in his locker on a Tuesday morning in early November. One word, all capitals, Sharpie on lined paper torn from a notebook. Gold digger. Declan stared at it for a full minute before crumpling it and throwing it in the trash. But the word stuck, barbed and vicious, embedding itself in his consciousness. Was that what people thought, that he was using Vivian? That their friendship, or whatever this was becoming, was transactional rather than genuine? Knox found him in the locker room 10 minutes later, took one look at his face and read the situation immediately. People are assholes, man. Don't let them get to you. Did you tell anyone about McDonald's, about any of it? No, I swear, but people have eyes. You two aren't exactly subtle. There's nothing to be subtle about. We're friends. Are you just friends? Declan didn't answer because he didn't know anymore. What had started as an unexpected connection after an awkward incident had evolved into something he couldn't categorize. He looked forward to their conversations with an intensity that felt disproportionate to their content. He thought about her when he should have been thinking about other things. He caught himself watching doors during his breaks, hoping she'd appear with some excuse to share his table. That wasn't just friendship, but it wasn't not friendship either. It was something in between, something undefined and increasingly impossible to ignore. The situation reached critical mass on a Wednesday afternoon when Hartford Elementary called during his lunch break. Isla had been in a fight. His daughter, who'd never raised a hand to anyone in her 7 years of life, had pushed another student during recess hard enough that the boy had fallen and scraped his hands. Principal Murray's voice carried both concern and confusion. "This is so unlike Isla, Mr. Hayes. We need you to come in and discuss what happened." Declan made it to the school in 10 minutes, found Isla in the principal's office with tear-streaked cheeks and small hands balled into defiant fists. She looked up when he entered, and the expression on her face, hurt and angry and bewildered, made his heart crack. "What happened, baby?" She wouldn't talk in front of Principal Murray, so they stepped out to give father and daughter privacy. The moment the door closed, Isla's defiance crumbled into sus. "Aiden said mean things about you. He said you're trying to marry a rich lady so we don't have to be poor anymore. He said you're using me to make her feel sorry for us. And his mom works at your building, and she told his mom, and his mom told him, and he told everyone at recess, and they were all laughing at you, Daddy." Each word landed like a physical blow. Declan knelt down and pulled his daughter into his arms, feeling her shake with the kind of tears that came from helpless "That's not true, Isla. None of it is true." "But he said it, and everyone believed him, and I pushed him because he wouldn't stop saying it, and now I'm in trouble." Principal Murray returned, and they had a conversation that was professionally sympathetic but ultimately unhelpful. Aiden's mother, Denise Hartman, who worked in Sterling Tech's accounting department, had apparently been sharing her opinions about Declan's relationship with the CEO at home. Her 8-year-old son had brought those opinions to school. School policy prohibited discussing parents' employment situations, but the damage was done. Isla would receive a warning for the physical altercation. Aiden would receive a warning for verbal harassment. Both sets of parents would be notified. Declan drove home in a fury that had nowhere to go. His daughter had been bullied because of rumors about his personal life. Bullied by a child who'd learned cruelty from an adult who should have known better. And he couldn't defend himself without making things worse. Denying anything was happening with Vivian felt like a lie. Confirming it would validate every ugly assumption people were making. That night, after Isla finally cried herself to sleep clutching Mr. Buttons like a lifeline, Declan sat at his kitchen table and made the hardest decision he'd made since his divorce. This had to end. Whatever was developing between him and Vivian, it wasn't worth his daughter's happiness. Wasn't worth Isla learning that the inability of adults to mind their own business could turn childhood into a battlefield. His hands shook as he typed the text message, "We need to talk. Tomorrow." Vivian's response came immediately, as if she'd been waiting for his message. "Of course. My office, 9 a.m. "No. Somewhere private. The issue is complicated." A longer pause this time. Then an address he recognized as her grandmother's house, 1247 Woodland St. 8 p.m. "I'll be there." He stared at the phone for a long time after knowing what he had to do and hating it with every fiber of his being. But Isla came first. Isla always came first. And if protecting her meant giving up whatever this thing with Vivian was becoming, that wasn't even a choice. It was just the reality of being a parent. Somewhere across Hartford in her grandmother's house with Fitzgerald curled on her lap. Vivian sat staring at the text exchange with a sick feeling growing in her stomach. She knew what complicated meant. She'd heard the rumors too, filtered through Sloane's careful diplomacy and the HR reports that crossed her desk weekly. She knew people were talking, knew they were saying ugly things about Declan. Knew it was only a matter of time before someone got hurt. She just hadn't expected it to be his daughter. And she hadn't expected that the realization would feel like her heart was breaking for a child she'd met exactly once. Thursday evening arrived with the weight of inevitability. Declan left Isla with Maeve, inventing a work meeting he couldn't avoid. His mother studied him with the particular intensity of women who'd raised sons through every variety of crisis, her eyes searching his face for answers he wasn't ready to give. "You look like you're going to a funeral." "Just a difficult conversation." I'll be back by 9. Declan. I'm fine, Mom, really. She didn't believe him, but she let him go, kissed Isla's forehead and told Declan to drive carefully, which somehow felt worse than interrogation. The grandmother's house sat on a quiet street in West End craftsman style with a front porch that sagged slightly on one corner. Nothing about it screamed CEO wealth. It looked like a place where normal people lived. Normal lives, which was probably exactly why Vivian kept it. The lights were on warm yellow, spilling through curtains that looked handmade. Declan sat in his car for 5 full minutes, rehearsing the speech he'd prepared before finally forcing himself up the walkway. Vivian opened the door before he could knock. She wore jeans and a Yale sweatshirt, her hair down around her shoulders, feet bare. In all their interactions, he'd never seen her this unguarded. The vulnerability of it made what he had to do feel like cruelty. Come in. The interior matched the exterior, lived in, comfortable, full of someone else's history. Photographs covered the walls, none of them featuring Vivian. An elderly woman with kind eyes appeared in most frames, sometimes alone. Sometimes with a younger version of Vivian who smiled more freely than the woman standing before him now. Fitzgerald emerged from beneath a side table, regarded Declan with feline suspicion for approximately 3 seconds, then decided he was acceptable and wound between his ankles. Coffee, tea, something stronger? No, thank you. Vivian's face tightened, reading his tone. She'd known this conversation was coming, he could see it in her eyes, but knowing didn't make it easier. What's wrong? Declan stayed standing near the door, needing the distance to maintain his resolve. Isla got in a fight at school yesterday, first one ever. She pushed another kid during recess. Is she okay? Physically, yes. Emotionally. He stopped collecting himself. The boy she pushed, his mother, works in Sterling Tech's accounting department, Denise Hartman. She's been talking at home about us, about you and me. Her son brought it to school, called me a gold digger in front of Isla's entire class, told everyone I'm using my daughter to manipulate you into giving us money. Vivian's hand flew to her mouth, genuine horror crossing her face. Oh, God. Isla asked me what a gold digger was, 7 years old, having to learn that word because adults can't mind their own business about things that aren't even happening. What do you mean, aren't even happening? The challenge hung between them, sharp and unavoidable. Declan met her eyes directly. I mean, I don't know what we're doing, Vivian. I don't know what this is, but whatever it is, it's hurting my daughter, and I can't let that continue. So you're here to end it. Her voice stayed level, controlled, but he saw her hands curl into fists at her sides. I have to. She comes first. She always comes first. I know. Vivian turned away, walking to the windows that looked out over her small backyard. That's what makes you a good father. It's one of the things I admire about you. This isn't fair to you either. People are saying terrible things about both of us. Your reputation, your position. I don't care about my reputation. You should. You're the CEO. You have a board to answer to shareholders, employees looking to you for leadership. Being associated with me damages all of that. She spun back to face him, and the rawness in her expression stopped his breath. Being associated with you is the only thing that's made me feel human in years. Do you understand that before you accidentally said those words at my party, I'd convinced myself this was enough? The company, the success, the money, the empty apartment, and the cat who tolerates me, and the life that looks perfect from the outside. I'd convinced myself I didn't need more. Vivian. You made me remember that I want more, that somewhere underneath the CEO and the net worth and the carefully managed public image, there's a person who wants to be chosen for herself. Not for what she represents or what she can provide or what strategic advantages she offers. Just for who she is. And I want that for you. I do. But wanting it and being able to give it to you are different things. I'm a catering supervisor with a used Honda and a kid who needs me stable and present. You're a CEO with a Mercedes and $47 million. We don't fit, Vivian. Not in any way that matters. Why? Because of money. Because of what other people think. Because my daughter is being bullied. The words came out louder than he'd intended, frustration and pain breaking through his attempt at calm. Because Isla came home crying yesterday, asking me if the things kids were saying were true. Because she told me, his voice cracked. She told me she doesn't want me to see you anymore if it means people are going to be mean to her. Fitzgerald darted away at the raised voice, disappearing into another room. Vivian stood, frozen tears tracking down her face unchecked. What did you tell her? That none of it was true, that you're my friend and there's nothing wrong with that. But she's 7, Vivian. She doesn't understand nuance. She doesn't care about the complicated reality of adult relationships. She just knows that being connected to you made her classmates cruel, and that's all she needs to know to want it to stop. Then we fight back. Vivian stepped closer, her voice fierce despite the tears. We make it absolutely clear that anyone who spreads rumors or involves children in workplace gossip will face consequences. I'll fire Denise Hartman. I'll issue a company-wide directive. That will make it worse. Don't you see that will prove to everyone that there's something to protect, that their suspicions are justified? I don't care what they think, but I do. Declan's voice rose to match hers. I need that job. I need that insurance. I need the stability it provides. I can't afford to be cavalier about my employment when I have a daughter who depends on me for everything. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the old house. Settling pipes creaking somewhere in the walls. Vivian sank onto the couch, defeated in a way he'd never seen her. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. You're right. Of course you're right. Your daughter's well-being comes before whatever this is between us. She looked up at him, mascara smudged under her eyes. But can I ask you something first before you walk away? Declan nodded, not trusting his voice. Is this just friendship, or is it something more? The question demanded honesty, and he owed her that much at minimum. I don't know. I think it could be more. I think maybe it's already becoming more, which is exactly why this is so hard. For me too. Vivian stood crossed to where he stood near the door, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive that he'd never be able to afford. I think I'm falling in love with you, Declan. I started falling that first day in my office when you apologized for reminding me I was lonely instead of apologizing for the joke. And I think if we walk away now, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what we could have been. His hands found her face before his brain could override the impulse. Thumbs brushing away tears. I've been married before, I know what love feels like, and this... He stopped, overwhelmed by the enormity of what he was about to say. This feels like it could be that. If we let it, but I can't ask you to fight a battle that will cost you everything. What if I want to fight? Then you'd be crazy. Your board will remove you if you publicly defend an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate. Your father will never speak to you again. Your reputation in business circles will be destroyed. Everything you've built could come crashing down. Those are all things I can survive losing. Vivian's hands covered his where they still cradled her face. What I can't survive is another 7 years of strategic partnerships and exit clauses and men who see me as an opportunity instead of a person. What I can't survive is sending you away because I was too afraid to choose something real. What about Isla? We protect her, together. We make it absolutely clear that anyone who targets a child, any child, answers to both of us. We show her that sometimes fighting for what matters is harder than walking away, but it's worth it. We show her that love is worth defending. Declan wanted to believe her, wanted to believe they could somehow navigate the impossible distance between their worlds. But the memory of Isla's tear-stained face, her small voice asking what gold digger meant, made him hesitate. I need time to think. Disappointment flickered across Vivian's features, but she nodded with understanding. Take all the time you need, but know this, I'm not walking away. Not from you, not from Isla, not unless you explicitly tell me to. I've spent my entire adult life making the practical choice, the safe choice, the choice that protected my career and my reputation. Just once I want to choose based on what I actually want instead of what makes sense on paper. And what do you want? You, Isla. Sunday mornings and terrible coffee and conversations that matter. A life that's mine instead of one that looks good in Forbes profiles. Declan's resolve wavered, cracked, threatened to shatter completely. He leaned forward, pressed his forehead against hers, breathing in the moment. This is insane. I know. It'll never work. Probably not. But he pulled back just far enough to meet her eyes. Maybe it's worth trying anyway. The kiss happened without conscious decision, a collision of want and fear and desperate hope. Vivian tasted like salt from tears and something sweet underneath, and kissing her felt like falling and flying simultaneously. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Declan rested his forehead against hers again. I'm still terrified. Me too. But I'd rather be terrified together than safe and alone. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the quiet house before Declan finally stepped back. I need to go. Isla's with my mom and I promised I wouldn't be late. Will I see you tomorrow? Yes, but Vivian, we have to be careful for Isla's sake. No more coffee dates at work, no more visible connection that people can gossip about. If we're going to do this, we do it privately until we figure out how to make it work without destroying both our lives. She nodded, understanding the necessity, even if the restriction hurt. Privately, I can do that. Declan left before he could change his mind, driving home through Hartford's dark streets with his mind spinning. He'd gone there to end things. Instead, he'd committed to fighting for something that seemed impossible by every rational measure. The fear remained sharp and present, but underneath it was something else. Hope, fragile and dangerous, that maybe they could build something real if they were careful enough, strategic enough, brave enough. The quarterly management meeting convened Monday morning at 9 sharp in Sterling Tech's largest conference room. 37 department heads and senior managers filled the space, along with the executive team and Patricia Donovan from HR. Vivian took her place at the head of the table, wearing her armor, a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, hair in its severe chignon makeup applied with the precision of war paint. She looked every inch the CEO, powerful and untouchable. But inside her heart hammered with the knowledge of what she was about to do. Graham Whitfield, the CFO, started with Q3 financial results. Revenue up 12% year over year. Client retention improved 8 percentage points. New contract acquisitions exceeding projections by 17%. Sterling Tech was thriving by every metric that mattered to shareholders and board members. The operations reports followed, then strategic initiatives, the comfortable rhythm of routine business that everyone in the room had participated in dozens of times before. Vivian let it all proceed normally, contributing where appropriate, asking sharp questions that demonstrated her mastery of every division's performance. Only when they reached the end of the formal agenda did she deviate from the script. Before we adjourn, there's something I need to address. The room's energy shifted immediately, like a barometer dropping before a storm. Tension replaced the comfortable routine. Graham set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. Patricia looked like she wanted to sink through the floor and disappear. There have been rumors circulating about Declan Hayes, a member of our facilities staff. Rumors suggesting an inappropriate relationship between Mr. Hayes and myself. Vivian stood, moving to the windows where she could see Hartford spread out below, gathering her courage. I'm sure many of you have heard them. Some of you may have even contributed to spreading them. No one spoke. No one moved. The silence was absolute. I want to be absolutely clear about several things. She turned to face the room, and her voice carried the steel that had built a fortune. First, there is no inappropriate relationship as defined by company policy. Declan Hayes and I are friends. We have coffee occasionally, we talk. His daughter has met me. None of this violates any professional boundary or conflicts of interest protocol. She paused, letting that settle into the uncomfortable silence. But second, and this is what I really need you to understand, your rumors, your gossip, your assumptions about what must be happening between a CEO and a facilities supervisor have resulted in a 7-year-old child being bullied at her elementary school. The statement detonated like a bomb. Several people had the grace to look ashamed. Others looked confused, clearly not connecting their break room speculation to real-world consequences for actual human beings. Isla Hayes was called names by a classmate whose mother works in our accounting department. Denise Hartman has been sharing her opinions about my personal life at home, and her 8-year-old son brought those opinions to school. A 7-year-old girl, a child, learned the word gold digger because adults in this building couldn't keep their speculation to themselves. Vivian's voice rose, anger bleeding through her professional control. That little girl was told that her father was using her to manipulate me for money. She got into her first physical altercation defending her father's honor. And that happened because people in this room decided it was acceptable to turn someone's private life into entertainment. Patricia cleared her throat nervously. Ms. Sterling, if there's been harassment, there has been. Systematic harassment of a good employee based on nothing more than the fact that I've chosen to treat him like a human being instead of invisible labor. Vivian pulled a folder from her portfolio, distributing copies around the table with crisp efficiency. This is a full HR report I commissioned last week. It details the origin and spread of rumors about Mr. Hayes and myself. It identifies 3 employees who have been primary sources of this gossip campaign, including Denise Hartman. All 3 are being terminated effective immediately for creating a hostile work environment and for behavior that directly resulted in the bullying of a minor child. You can't fire people for talking. The objection came from somewhere in the back of the room, anonymous in the packed space. I can and will terminate employees who harass other staff members and whose actions cause harm to children. That's not casual conversation. That's creating a toxic workplace culture, and I will not tolerate it under any circumstances. Graham leaned forward, his expression genuinely troubled. Vivian, with all due respect, this validates what people were saying. It suggests there's a relationship you're protecting. There's a friendship I'm acknowledging. But more importantly, there's a principle I'm defending. Vivian moved back to the table, placing both hands on its polished surface, leaning forward. I am the CEO of this company. That position gives me many things: authority, compensation, influence over the direction of this organization. But it does not give me the right to be treated as more than human. And it absolutely does not give any of you the right to punish someone for the crime of treating me as less than my title. She straightened, letting her words settle like snow over the room. Declan Hayes saw me as a person when I desperately needed to be seen that way. He listened when I needed someone to listen. He's been kind and honest and genuine in a world where those qualities are increasingly rare. If that makes him suspicious in your eyes, then I strongly suggest you examine what that says about your own assumptions about human nature and professional relationships. The room remained silent, people avoiding each other's gazes like children caught misbehaving. I have never used my position to grant favors to people I'm personally connected to. I have never compromised this company's integrity for private reasons. Mr. Hayes reports to facilities, which reports to operations, which reports to Graham. I have no direct authority over his employment, his compensation, or his professional advancement. She gathered her materials with deliberate precision. But I will not hide behind corporate neutrality while a good man and his daughter are destroyed by gossip. That's not leadership. That's cowardice. And I didn't build this company by being a coward. Anyone found continuing to spread rumors or engaging in retaliatory behavior toward Declan Hayes or his family will face disciplinary action up to and including termination. This is not a suggestion or a request. This is a directive from your CEO. Vivian looked directly at Patricia. I want weekly reports on workplace culture for the next quarter. If I hear of any continued harassment of Mr. Hayes or any other employee, there will be immediate and severe consequences. Is that understood? Patricia nodded mutely, making notes with hands that trembled slightly. This meeting is adjourned. Vivian walked out without waiting for response or discussion, leaving behind a room full of stunned silence and the unmistakable sense that something fundamental had shifted in the company's unspoken rules. Behind the closed door, she let herself tremble for exactly 10 seconds before forcing her spine straight again. She'd just publicly declared her friendship with Declan, essentially confirmed the rumors while claiming they were overblown, threatened her entire management team, and set herself up for a confrontation with the board that could cost her everything. She didn't care. For the first time in 7 years, Vivian had chosen what she wanted over what was safe, and it felt like freedom. Sloane was waiting outside the conference room when Vivian emerged, her expression caught somewhere between admiration and abject terror. "Your father called. Multiple times. He wants to see you immediately." "I'm sure he does. Winston Carmichael also requested an emergency private meeting this afternoon. Schedule it for 3. I'll need time to prepare. And Declan Hayes is waiting in your office. He said it was urgent." Vivian's heart rate spiked. "How long has he been there?" "About 5 minutes. I told him you were in the management meeting." She found Declan standing by her windows, looking out over Hartford with tension visible in every line of his body. He turned when she entered, and his face was a mixture of emotions she couldn't quite parse: shock, concern, something that might have been awe. "I heard what you did." Word traveled fast in this building. Knox had probably been catering the management meeting, heard everything. "Who told you?" "Knox. He heard the whole thing." Declan moved closer, and she saw fear warring with something else in his eyes. "Vivian, you just made yourself a target. The board is going to come after you for this. Let them try. Your father will say exactly what he always says, that I'm too emotional, too impractical, that women can't separate business from personal feelings. I've heard it all before, and I'm done caring. And you're okay with that? With potentially losing everything? I told you I wasn't walking away. I meant it, even if it costs me everything." He crossed the remaining distance between them, taking her hands in his. His were calloused from years of manual work, warm and solid and real. "You could lose your position, your company, your reputation in the business community. Or I could finally have something actually worth having." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither of them could deny anymore. Declan's thumb traced circles on her palm, the gesture intimate despite its simplicity. "You're crazy. We established that last week. And stubborn. Absolutely. And possibly the bravest person I've ever met." That broke through her composure. Vivian felt tears threaten and blinked them back furiously. "I'm terrified. I just gambled everything on what a friendship that might become more, on protecting a man I've known for 3 months, on defending a child I've met exactly once." "Then why did you do it?" "Because I'm tired of choosing safety over happiness. Because Isla shouldn't suffer. Because adults are terrible at minding their own business. Because you—" She stopped, the words catching in her throat. "Because I what?" "Because you make me feel like the person I was before I learned to be what everyone expected. The person my grandmother wanted me to be instead of the person my father needed me to become. And I don't want to lose that feeling." He pulled her into his arms, and Vivian let herself have this moment of vulnerability. Her face pressed against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of laundry detergent and something uniquely him. They stood like that until her intercom buzzed. Sloane's voice crackled through. "Ms. Sterling, your father is here. He's quite insistent about seeing you immediately." Vivian pulled back, wiping her eyes quickly. "Tell him I'll be with him in 5 minutes." Declan's hands framed her face, gentle and grounding. "Do you want me to stay?" "No. This is a conversation I need to have alone. But Declan, thank you. For being worth fighting for." He kissed her forehead, brief and tender, then left through the side door that led to the executive corridor. Vivian took 3 deep breaths, checked her appearance in the compact mirror she kept in her desk drawer, and prepared to face her father's wrath. Reginald Sterling stormed into her office like a force of nature unleashed. At 68, he remained formidable, silver hair, perfectly trimmed custom suit fitted to hide age's slight softening eyes, sharp with the intelligence that had built Sterling Tech from nothing into a $100 million company. What the hell were you thinking? Vivian remained seated behind her desk, refusing to be intimidated in her own office. Hello, Father. Always a pleasure. Don't be flippant with me. Graham called me 20 minutes ago. You stood in front of the entire management team and essentially admitted to an inappropriate relationship with a facilities worker. I admitted to friendship. There's a significant difference. Not to the board there isn't, not to shareholders, not to anyone who matters in this industry. He paced in front of her desk, agitation evident in every movement. Do you have any idea what you've done? The ammunition you've just handed to your enemies? I defended an employee from systematic workplace harassment. That's called leadership, Father. That's called emotional compromise. You can't fire people for talking, Vivian. That's a wrongful termination lawsuit waiting to happen, and the company will lose. I fired people for creating a hostile work environment that directly resulted in a child being bullied at school. That's entirely within my authority as CEO and completely defensible in any court of law. Reginald stopped pacing, facing her with an expression that mixed fury and something that might have been genuine concern buried deep beneath. This is about that catering worker, the one who propositioned you at your birthday party. He didn't proposition me. He made a thoughtless joke that happened to reveal more about my life than I was comfortable acknowledging. And now you're risking everything, your position, your reputation, this company's stability to defend him. Can you possibly hear how that sounds? Vivian stood, meeting her father's gaze with steel of her own. I hear exactly how it sounds, and I don't care anymore. You don't? His voice rose sharply before he visibly controlled himself. Vivian, the board is demanding an emergency session. Winston called me personally. They're scheduling a meeting for tomorrow morning at 8 to discuss your fitness to continue as CEO. Then I'll be there to defend my actions. What defense could you possibly offer that you've maintained professional objectivity while publicly defending a man you're clearly emotionally involved with, that you've put company resources and your position at risk for what, a friendship with someone who earns $40,000 a year? His salary is completely irrelevant to this discussion. It's entirely relevant. It demonstrates the power imbalance, the appearance of impropriety, the impossibility of anything genuine existing between you. Reginald's voice carried decades of certainty. For God's sake, Vivian, you were engaged to Thaddeus Ashford, a man from the right family, the right schools, the right social circles, and you're throwing away everything you've built for a single father who serves champagne at corporate events. The contempt in his voice ignited something in Vivian that years of dutiful daughterhood had suppressed. She came around her desk, advancing on her father with fury that matched and exceeded his own. Yes, I'm choosing him over Thaddeus. Do you want to know why? Because Thaddeus was planning our divorce before we even got married. Because he described our relationship as a strategic partnership with a built-in expiration date. Because every single person you've ever wanted me to marry has seen me as an asset to acquire rather than a person to love. Love is a luxury, people in our position. Don't you dare finish that sentence. Vivian's voice dropped to something dangerous. Don't you dare tell me one more time that love is a luxury I can't afford. You said that 7 years ago when I ended my engagement, and I believed you. I spent 7 years convincing myself that success and power and money were enough substitutes for human connection. That I didn't need anything more than what you had built. They should be enough, but they're not. The words came out raw, stripped of every professional defense. I'm 35 years old, worth $47 million, running a company I helped build from 20 employees to over 200, and I come home every single night to an empty apartment and a cat who tolerates my existence. Is that your definition of enough, Father? Is that the life you wanted for me? Reginald's face hardened into the expression she knew too well, the one that said, emotions were weaknesses to be overcome. It's the definition of success for people in our position, for people with our responsibilities. Then maybe I don't want our position anymore. Maybe I don't want to be the kind of person who sacrifices everything human for the sake of quarterly earnings and shareholder value. The statement hung in the air between them, shocking in its finality. Reginald stared at his daughter as if she'd spoken in a language he didn't recognize. "You don't mean that." "I have never meant anything more in my entire life." Vivian's voice was quiet now, but absolutely certain. "You built this company, Dad. You sacrificed everything for it, including Mom, including me, including any relationship that might have interfered with your vision of success. And I followed your template perfectly for 15 years. Look where it's gotten me. It's gotten you to the top of your industry at 35 years old, CEO of a thriving company, respected throughout Connecticut's business community. It's gotten me profoundly lonely. It's gotten me to a place where a facilities supervisor's accidental joke felt like the most honest human interaction I'd had in years. It's gotten me wondering if anyone will ever see me as Vivian instead of as Sterling Tech's CEO, or Reginald Sterling's daughter, or a balance sheet with good connections." Vivian moved to the windows, her back to her father. "Declan Hayes sees me as a person. Not a CEO, not a Sterling, not a strategic opportunity, just Vivian. And I am not giving that up because it makes you uncomfortable, or because the board disapproves, or because it doesn't fit into your vision of who I should be. The board will remove you for this. Then I'll start over somewhere else, build something new, find work that doesn't require me to pretend I don't have a heart." "You're being absurdly childish. I'm being honest for the first time in my adult life. I'm choosing what I actually want instead of what looks impressive in business profiles and networking events." Reginald pulled out his phone, typed something with sharp, angry movements. "I'm notifying Winston that we need an emergency board session for 8 a.m. tomorrow. You'll need to defend these decisions to them, not just to me. And Vivian, they will not be gentle. Winston is already discussing removal for cause, citing emotional instability that affects professional judgment. Then I'll defend myself. But I'm not backing down, and I'm not apologizing." He studied her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression, something that might have been grudging respect buried beneath layers of disappointment and anger. "You're going to lose everything you've worked for. Maybe, but at least it will be my choice. At least I'll have chosen something I actually want for once in my life." He left without another word, the door closing behind him with finality that felt like an ending. Vivian sank into her chair, hands shaking as she reached for her phone. She texted Declan, "Board meeting tomorrow, 8 a.m. They're going to try to remove me. Still worth it." His response came within seconds. "Are you sure?" she typed back without hesitation. "Never been more sure of anything." "Then fight like hell. Isla and I will be here when you're done." That simple message, the promise of people waiting for her, people who cared about her as a person rather than as a position, gave Vivian the strength she needed. She spent the rest of the day preparing her defense, building the case for why personal relationships didn't inherently compromise professional judgment, compiling evidence of Sterling Tech's unprecedented success under her leadership. Around midnight, she gave up on preparation and drove to her grandmother's house. Made tea she didn't drink, sat in Eleanor's chair with Fitzgerald purring on her lap, and let herself imagine what failure might look like. No CEO title, no corner office, no corporate power structure, just herself and whatever came next. The strange part was that it didn't terrify her nearly as much as it should have. Without the company, she'd still have this house, still have Fitzgerald, still have the possibility of building something real with Declan if they could navigate the impossible distance between their worlds. Still have the chance to discover who Vivian Sterling could be when she wasn't performing the role everyone expected. She fell asleep in the chair and dreamed of Sunday mornings that hadn't happened yet.